Walked out of my mother-in-law's attorney's office with a sealed envelope pressed against my chest and dirt from my husband's grave still on the heels of my boots. I had not eaten since the day before. I had not slept in 4 days. And I was about to drive back to the house I shared with my husband for 6 years, to tell his family that he had left me everything, a $4.2 million life insurance policy, a paid-off home in Scottsdale, and a controlling stake in the regional logistics company he built from nothing. But when I pulled into my own driveway and reached for the door handle, I heard laughter coming from inside my house. Not quiet, polite, grief-muffled laughter. Loud, celebratory, champagne-clinking laughter. The kind you hear at a party, not at a wake. My husband had been in the ground for less than 6 hours. My name is Ivy. I am 31 years old, and I am a licensed CPA who specializes in forensic accounting for a mid-sized firm in Phoenix. My husband Michael was 38. He died of a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning while he was making coffee. He was standing in our kitchen in his socks, and then he was gone. The paramedics said he likely felt nothing. I have been trying to believe that for months. Michael was quiet about money in the way that only truly careful people are. He never drove flashy cars. He wore the same watch for 11 years, but he was meticulous. He had been building his company, a regional freight and logistics operation he started in his late 20s, for over a decade. He had life insurance policies I did not even know about until his estate attorney called me 48 hours after the funeral home took him away. I thought his family was at the house to help me. His older brother had flown in from Dallas. His brother's wife had come with him. His mother had driven up from Tucson. I thought they were there because they were grieving too, because they loved Michael, because that is what family does when the worst thing happens. I was wrong. I stood on my own front porch with my key in my hand, and I listened. His brother's voice carried the clearest. He always talked like he was the smartest person in the room, a habit he had never bothered to disguise, even when Michael was alive. "She has no idea what that company is actually worth," his brother said, and I heard the clink of a glass. "Michael kept her in the dark on purpose. He didn't want her meddling." That was a lie. Michael told me everything, but I stayed still. His brother's wife spoke next, her voice smooth and practiced, the way it always was when she wanted something. "The buy-sell agreement has a survivorship clause. If we move fast before she gets an attorney involved, we can trigger a forced valuation at the depressed rate. She'll walk away with a fraction of what it's actually worth and think she got a fair deal because she's grieving and she doesn't know to push back." "She's an accountant," his mother said. There was a pause. "She might figure it out." "She's an accountant who just buried her husband this morning," his brother's wife replied. "She's not going to be running financial models tonight. We just need her signature on the preliminary transfer agreement. Tell her it's standard estate procedure. She'll sign." I stood on that porch for a long time. Long enough that my hand went cold around my key. Long enough that something inside me that had been soft and devastated since Tuesday morning turned into something else entirely. Something quiet and very, very focused. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my professional life finding the thing people tried to hide. I trace money through shell accounts and falsified documents. I reconstruct financial histories that other people deliberately destroyed. My grief was real. My love for Michael was real. But my brain does not stop working just because my heart is breaking. Those two things have always existed in me at the same time, and standing on that porch, I felt them both very clearly. I wiped my face, I took a breath, and then I made my expressions soft and lost and overwhelmed, which was not entirely a performance, and I opened my front door. The laughter stopped the instant they heard my key. By the time I stepped into the living room, they had rearranged themselves into a tableau of grief. His mother was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. His brother's wife had her hand pressed to her heart. His brother stood up immediately and crossed the room to hug me, and I let him, because I needed to understand exactly how far they were willing to go before I showed a single card. "We've been so worried about you," his brother said into my hair. "I'm okay," I said, which was not true at all, but it was the right answer for what I needed to happen next. We sat down. His brother's wife brought me tea I didn't ask for, and I held the mug with both hands because it gave me something to do with my body while I listened. His brother waited approximately 11 minutes before he started talking about the company. He framed it as concern. He said the company had been struggling. He said Michael had mentioned to him privately that he was worried about cash flow, that there were outstanding debts I didn't know about, that the smart move would be to let the family take over operations immediately to stabilize things before creditors came knocking. He set a folder on the coffee table. He said it was the preliminary transfer documentation that Michael's company attorney had drafted. I looked at the folder. I looked at his face. He had Michael's jaw, but none of Michael's honesty, and the difference was very apparent to me in that moment. "I don't want to deal with paperwork tonight," I said, and my voice cracked, which was real. "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "The filing deadline is time-sensitive," his brother's wife said gently. "We really do need a signature tonight, sweetheart. It's just a formality, to protect you." I picked up the folder. I opened it. I let my eyes move across the pages slowly, the way someone does when they're reading but not really comprehending, when they're too tired and too sad to process legal language. I turned pages. I nodded at nothing. What I was actually doing was reading every single word. The document was not standard estate procedure. It was a privately drafted agreement that, if signed, would trigger a forced buyout of my stake in Michael's company at a valuation that was pegged to a single quarterly report from 8 months ago, the worst quarter the company had in 3 years. During a period when 2 major contracts fell through simultaneously, the actual current valuation, based on the contracts Michael had secured in the last 6 months, was more than 3 times higher. Signing this would have cost me somewhere between $800,000 and $1.1 million. They were asking me to sign it the night of my husband's funeral. I turned to the last page. There was a signature line with my name printed below it, and a pen had been placed in the folder. It was a nice pen, heavy silver, the kind you use when you want the moment to feel official. I picked up the pen. I held it over the line. I felt his brother lean forward slightly in his chair. I felt his brother's wife go very still. I set the pen down. "I need some water," I said. "I'll be right back." I walked to the kitchen. I filled a glass. I stood at the sink with my back to the doorway, and I opened my phone and texted my firm's senior partner, a man I have worked beside for 6 years who has seen every variety of financial fraud there is. The message was 4 sentences. I told him what the document said. I told him what valuation they were using. I told him I needed an independent appraisal locked in before morning. He replied in under 2 minutes, "Already on it. Do not sign anything. I'm calling the estate attorney now." I went back to the living room. I told him I was exhausted and needed to sleep, and that we would handle everything in the morning. His brother's wife started to push back, and his brother put a hand on her arm, and they left. His mother hugged me at the door and told me I was family and that they were going to take care of me. I smiled and said goodnight and locked the deadbolt the moment the door closed. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor in my funeral dress, and I cried for about 40 minutes because Michael was gone, and I was alone in a house that still smelled like him, and that was the truth underneath everything else. But when I was done, I got up, washed my face, and got to work. Over the next 3 days, I pulled every financial document related to Michael's company. I had access to all of it because Michael had made me a co-signatory on every account 2 years into our marriage. He said he did it because he trusted me more than anyone. He said he never wanted me to be in a position where I didn't know exactly where we stood. I had not fully understood at the time how much that decision would matter. What I found was not what his brother had described. The company was not struggling. It was thriving. Michael had signed 2 major new freight contracts in the last quarter that had not yet posted to public filings. His revenue projections for the following year were the strongest in the company's history. The cash flow concerns his brother had described were fiction. There were no outstanding creditor issues. There was no urgency. There was only a family who thought a grieving widow would be too shattered to look closely at what she was signing. I also pulled the buy-sell agreement that Michael had originally filed when he incorporated the company. His brother was listed as a minority stakeholder at 12%. That agreement did have a survivorship clause, but it did not say what his brother claimed it said. It gave the surviving spouse, me, full right of first refusal on any transfer, and it explicitly required an independent third-party valuation before any buyout could be triggered. The document his brother had put on my coffee table wasn't a standard procedure. It was something a private attorney had drafted specifically to circumvent the actual agreement already on file. That was not an oversight. That was fraud. I forwarded everything to my firm's partner and to the estate attorney who had handled Michael's trust. By the end of the third day, I had also retained a business litigation attorney, a woman named, I'll just call her my attorney, who had 20 years of experience in exactly this kind of corporate estate dispute. She reviewed the fake transfer document and used a word I will not repeat here, but it was not a legal term. His brother called me every day during that period. His tone shifted gradually, from concern to impatient to, by the fourth day, something that had an edge to it. He said the filing window was closing. He said I was being irrational. He said Michael would have wanted the company to stay in the family. That last one landed differently than he intended because Michael had been very specific in his trust documents about exactly what he wanted, and it was not that. On the 5th day after the funeral, his brother and his wife came back to the house without calling first. They knocked. I answered, because I knew they were coming. My attorney had advised me to let them present their position fully, on camera. I had enabled the smart home recording system before I opened the door, something Michael had installed 2 years ago after a contractor dispute, a whole home security setup with audio that recorded to a private cloud server. His brother came in and sat down and told me that he had spoken to a judge he knew personally. He said the judge had advised him that a petition for estate guardianship was a viable option given my emotional instability in the days since Michael's death. He said if I did not sign the transfer agreement by end of business Friday, he would file for temporary control of Michael's estate assets on the grounds that I was not fit to manage them in my current state. His brother's wife smiled at me while he said this. It was the kind of smile that is meant to look sympathetic. I kept my face very still. I asked a few questions that sounded like confusion and fear. I asked what guardianship would mean for me practically. His brother explained, with genuine relish, that it would mean I would need his written approval to access any of the joint accounts, that the company transfer would be executed under court supervision, and that I would receive a monthly stipend while the estate was being administered. He framed it as protection. He used that word 4 times. After they left, I called my attorney and told her what had been said on camera, word for word. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "They just handed us everything we need." The estate guardianship petition they filed on Friday was, to be technical, a legal document, but it required them to submit their own financial disclosures to the court to demonstrate they were responsible fiduciaries. It required them to testify under oath about their relationship to Michael's estate, and it required them to defend the legitimacy of the transfer document they had drafted. My attorney had been waiting for exactly this. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I spent the weekend preparing with my litigation team and the forensic accountants at my firm who had been working quietly in the background since that first text message 5 nights earlier. By Monday, we had a complete documented analysis of the fraudulent valuation methodology in the fake transfer agreement. We had the original buy-sell agreement with the survivorship clause that explicitly contradicted everything his brother had claimed. We had the independent appraisal showing the company's actual current value. We had the audio recording of his brother describing the estate guardianship threat. And we had something else. One of the forensic accountants on my team, while pulling public business records, had found something interesting. His brother's Dallas-based consulting firm had done business with 2 of Michael's freight clients over the past 18 months. The fees his brother's firm had charged those clients were listed in the same quarter used to peg the depressed valuation in the fake transfer document. He had positioned himself as a vendor to Michael's company's clients, which meant he had access to contract details and revenue projections that were not publicly available. He had known the real value of the company. He had known it the entire time. That was not just fraud. That was insider information used to construct a fraudulent document to deceive a widow. My attorney added it to the exhibit file and used a different word this time, one that was a legal term. I arrived at the courthouse on Wednesday in a gray suit. I carried one briefcase. I had not told his brother or his wife what we had found, because I needed them to walk into that courtroom feeling confident. Confident people make mistakes on the stand. They elaborate. They explain too much. They say things they would not say if they were scared. His brother testified first. He described me as emotionally fragile. He told the judge I had been erratic and difficult to reach, and that he was worried about my ability to make sound financial decisions during a period of acute grief. He said Michael had confided in him about concerns regarding the company's stability. He said the transfer agreement was standard practice and entirely in my interest. He said all of this under oath. Then my attorney stood up. She entered the independent appraisal first. The judge reviewed the current valuation, 3 times higher than what the fake transfer document had used, and looked at his brother over the top of her reading glasses. She entered the original buy-sell agreement next, with the survivorship clause highlighted. The judge read the relevant section and set the document down slowly. She entered the business records showing his brother's consulting firm's relationship with Michael's clients, time-stamped 18 months of transactions that demonstrated he had access to non-public contract information. Then she played the audio recording. The courtroom was not large. It did not need to be. His brother's voice came through very clearly, describing the guardianship threat, explaining that I would need his written approval to access accounts, talking about the monthly stipend. His brother's wife was sitting beside him, and I watched the color change in her face as she heard herself laughing in the background of that recording. The judge dismissed the guardianship petition before his brother's attorney had finished his response. She did not do it quietly. She noted for the record that the petition appeared to have been filed in bad faith using manufactured concerns about the respondent's competence, and that the financial documentation submitted by the petitioner contained material inconsistencies with public records. She referred the fraudulent transfer document in the audio recording to the county district attorney's office for review. She also said something directly to his brother before she closed the hearing. I will not quote it exactly, but it was not gentle, and the people in the gallery heard it, and some of them were his business associates who had come to observe what they expected to be a straightforward estate matter. His brother did not look at me when he left the courtroom. The district attorney's review took 4 months. At the end of it, his brother was charged with attempted fraud, civil conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty under Arizona estate law. His brother's wife was named as a co-respondent in the civil suit. The private attorney who drafted the fraudulent transfer documents surrendered his license to the state bar pending investigation. His brother's consulting firm lost both of the clients whose contracts he had used to manipulate the valuation. When the nature of his access to their non-public information came out during the civil discovery process, they terminated their agreements immediately. His firm's reputation in the Dallas market did not recover. I know this not because I monitored it, but because 2 of Michael's former colleagues mentioned it to me months later, almost as an afterthought. His mother called me once during this period. It was a long message, and it started with an apology and ended with a request that I consider dropping the civil suit to preserve what remained of the family. I listened to it twice. I did not call her back. She had been in that living room. She had heard the plan and said nothing to me. She had hugged me at the door and told me I was family. I know what family means, and it is not that. I did not sell the company. I hired a general manager with freight industry experience and took a seat on the board. The 2 contracts Michael had signed before he died closed exactly as projected. By the end of the fiscal year, revenue was up 22%. I think Michael would have found that satisfying in the particular quiet way he found most things satisfying. I still live in Scottsdale. I still go to work. I still sometimes open the cabinet where Michael kept his coffee and have to stand there for a minute before I can close it again. Grief does not have a clean ending. It just changes shape over time. What I can tell you is that the part of me that stood on that porch and listened and decided not to fall apart, that part did not come from anger. It came from love. Michael spent 11 years being careful and honest so that I would be protected. The least I could do was pay attention. Some people look at what I did and call it cold. They say I should have confronted them at the door, should have screamed, should have thrown them out of my house the night of the funeral. Maybe, but screaming would have felt better for about 4 minutes, and then they would have lawyered up and I would have had nothing. Instead, I waited, I documented. I let them believe I was too broken to see clearly. And then I walked into a courtroom and showed a judge exactly who they were. In their own words, on their own timeline, without a single piece of evidence they could call fabricated. The house is very quiet now. Some nights that is still hard. But it is my quiet. It belongs to me, and so does everything Michael built, and so does every single morning I wake up and choose to keep going. That is not nothing. That is, I think, everything. There is a version of that night where I walked through my front door and fell apart completely, where I screamed at them, where I threw them out and cried and said every true thing I was thinking, and they drove away and immediately started building a legal case around my emotional state. I have thought about that version a lot. It would have felt honest. It would have felt like the right thing to do. And it would have cost me everything Michael spent 11 years carefully protecting. The hardest thing I have ever done was stand in my own kitchen, still in my funeral dress, and choose to think instead of react. Not because I was cold, not because I didn't love him or wasn't breaking, but because I understood, somewhere underneath the grief, that the people in my living room were counting on me to fall apart. They had built their entire plan around my pain. They needed me to be too devastated to read closely, too shattered to ask the right questions, too overwhelmed to notice what they were actually asking me to sign. My suffering was their strategy. What they didn't account for was that doing the right thing and being smart about it are not separate choices. They are the same choice, made at the same moment. I didn't expose them because I wanted revenge. I documented everything and walked into that courtroom because Michael's work deserved to be protected, because the truth was the truth regardless of how much it cost me to prove it, and because allowing fraud to go unchallenged is its own kind of moral failure. Integrity isn't only what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when you're exhausted and alone and someone is offering you a way out that would only require you to look away. And then there's what got me through the actual work of it. The late nights pulling financial records, the phone calls with attorneys, the weeks of sitting with evidence instead of sitting with my grief. People sometimes say that intelligence is a gift, something you either have or you don't. I don't think that's right. What carried me through those weeks was not raw talent. It was the discipline of using the skills I had built over years of hard, unglamorous professional work and applying them to the most personal crisis of my life. My training as a forensic accountant wasn't separate from who I am as a person. In that moment, it was exactly who I needed to be. But none of it, not the documentation, not the legal strategy, not the courtroom, would have meant anything without the decision to keep going when keeping going felt impossible. Michael was gone. I was alone in a house that still had his coffee in the cabinet, and every morning for weeks I had to choose again to get up and do the next thing. That is not a dramatic choice. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It just looks like a woman going to work. But it is everything. The willingness to keep moving through something that has no clean ending without knowing when it will feel better, without any guarantee that the effort will pay off. That is what actually determines what your life becomes on the other side. What happened to my brother-in-law and his wife was a direct result of their own choices. They constructed a fraud. They filed a false petition. They testified under oath to things they knew were not true. They handed the court exactly what it needed to hold them accountable. I didn't have to do anything to them. I only had to tell the truth, clearly and completely, and let the consequences follow naturally from what they had done. Michael used to say that the quietest people in the room are usually the ones paying the most attention. I think about that a lot now. I think he knew something about me that I was still learning about myself. The house is still quiet. Some mornings that is still the hardest thing. But it is an honest quiet, and I earned it, and I am not giving it up for anyone.